17,540 on the index. The broader markets looking resilient. BPCL, NTPC, Power Grid and IndusInd Bank upbeat in trade. But let's focus in on the energy space, and coal prices have been on the rise as supply fears take over once again. Let's bring on board my colleague Anisha Jain as she explains what's happening in this space and, more importantly, what the government is doing to ensure coal availability. Anisha?
Oh, well, yes, rising mercury and scorching heat have caused heat wave alerts in many parts of the country, with above normal temperatures expected to continue for the summer months as well. This, coupled with geopolitical tensions, has resulted in doubling of the coal prices on a year-on-year basis. As a result, the share of imported coal has halved to 4%, resulting in overcrowding for domestic coal. Despite the efforts from the government to reduce supply to non-power sector and mandate the higher blending and maximize the captive coal utilization, the industry is facing a very, very strong supply shock. For instance, the fuel stock levels has dwindled to the level of below 10 days, and to put it in context, the normative requirement is 24 days. In fact, almost 100 power plants in the country are at critical or supercritical stock level with respect to the coal inventory. And this has resulted in power outages as well as mandatory shutdowns being requested in some part of the country, as the PLF levels have dropped to the level of 57.5% over the last 10 months. As a further pain for the consumers, this has resulted in increased tariffs. In fact, in the month of February, the MCP rates at IEX had reached a highest level of 20 rupees per unit, as the cost of production of power has doubled on a year-on-year basis. Going forward, experts forecast that with the impending heat conditions and the commodity prices, which is expected to remain sticky, power tariffs will remain elevated as far as FY23 is concerned. Back to you guys.
Thanks very much, Anisha, for giving us that heads up. Let's take forward the discussion with Anil Razan, the former Power Secretary, as well as Sabyasachi Majumdar, who joins in from ICRA. Thank you so much for taking time out and joining in. Mr. Razan, I'm going to begin with you, and let's start by talking about those supply side issues. Do you see the price of imported coal now moderating over the next few weeks, or do you think that at least for this summer we should brace ourselves for coal prices remaining elevated?
I think we should not expect softening of the prices. That is my understanding of the situation, because in any case the shipping costs are also up with the oil prices high, and as far as we are concerned, the dollar-rupee parity is also not particularly good. All in all, I think you see out of the stocks that the best of my information, the stocks you see there are critical stocks are at the domestic coal is 59 stations, imported coal 10 stations, and of course 9 stations not in operation. 78 coal stations in all, which are critical. And at pithead stations, you see the stock position for about 18 plants, about 85%. Non-pithead, 155 plants, 31%. A total of 173 plants, the overall position is about 38% of the stocking requirement level. Now that is not a particularly good scenario, because 1,82,000, I think 871 megawatts is dependent on domestic coal. Imported coal is 16,730 megawatts. You see, with the heat wave coming, I also expect that coal mining would be affected in states like Orissa and others where conditions become inhuman for mining. And normally I think coal mining slows down a bit. So if the heat wave is up, the the demand for power is also going to be up. We now more and more in multi-storied housing with glass fascia. We built a lot of housing stock, but I think environmentally it's not been a very good quality construction as far as environmental issues and natural cooling or drafts or otherwise those conditions that ought to have been taken into account. So all in all, I think coal is something that we have to worry about. And I only hope that Coal India is in the act of ensuring a smooth coordination with the railways and the coal plants. Of course, the stocking limits also should not be too high, because if the coal generating stations, which already have a huge amount of outstandings from the distribution companies, if that cash position doesn't improve, and I think it's not showing very great signs of improvement right away. We have to keep that in mind, and I think transportation will have to be much faster and smoother. That's my broad take.
Right. And with that, I'd like to go across to Mr. Majumdar now. Mr. Majumdar, it does show that the electricity shortage since October was actually the worst in the month of March. We've already seen coal supply to non-essential industries being reduced. Your take on this, and what can be done also, importantly, to make sure we have enough coal supply, whether it is a ramp up in production or, look at the more expensive option of imports?
Yeah, so basically the coal situation is likely to remain quite tight over the near term, let's say over the next 3 months till the time the monsoon and the hydro generation kicks in. So I think over the next 3 months we are having a tight situation. As far as the increased production is concerned, I think we already produce about 8-9% more in 2002. This year will be ending with a coal production growth of around 9%. And we should have a similar number for the next year also. So in terms of production growth from domestic sources, there's not really that much more that we can do. I think Coal India Limited and other miners are doing a good enough job. So really, I don't see much possibility of further ramping up from the current levels. The other thing, of course, is on imported coal. But imported coal, there are issues like, for example, Indonesia keeps putting restrictions on exports. There's shipping constraints, which Mr. Razdan has pointed out. And the fact remains that it is much more expensive, running power plants using imported coal. For instance, at the current prices, the variable cost of generation is still somewhere around 4.5 as against about 3 rupee 10 paise before this recent price hike happened. And so obviously there is a cost, and that has to be borne ultimately by the consumer. But before that, the DISCOM comes into the picture. And since the tariffs are not immediately, that pass on doesn't happen as smoothly as it should, it would create further problems on the working capital position of both the DISCOMs as well as the generators. Now, the Ministry of Power has already suggested that the blending of imported coal, even for purely domestic-based players, thermal power generators, should be increased by about 4%. But even that 4% increase, blending of imported coal would mean about 18 paise cost at the tariff level for DISCOMs and users. So that itself will create a lot of challenge. I mean, it's not that the DISCOMs are in the pink of rice, and if there's to be further 18 paise they have to bear. It's not going to be a very comfortable position for them also.
Mr. Razdan, while you're calling for good coordination, once again, March had the worst electricity shortage in India since October. There is power demand that is going up. The world is normalizing, as is India. Offices are reopening. Industrial activity will also be picking up. So far, we've seen Coal India reduce supply to non-essential sectors. We've seen the Coal Ministry also put on hold a number of auctions, saying they're only going to do one big auction. Is this the way to go? What else would be your suggestions?
I feel that the PLF has got a capacity to go up. We have to ensure that coal supplies come in. Luckily, the power situation throughout the pandemic was pretty good in spite of all the constraints, though we had a bit of a shock on coal availability at some locations, which had caused some degree of concern and, if not, a little panic. But I think we need to keep up. We've got the capacity. The PLFs are not as high as they used to be. about a decade back. But the worrisome factor is that, you see, the private sector is not getting paid, while the government sector in the generating sector has means. The private sector, which we had ramped up in terms of capacity addition, that payment mechanism needs to be taken care of. And there comes in the question of tariffs and recoveries, because power, you see, being still essentially distribution by and large in the government hands in the states, it becomes a convenient election item. I wouldn't use the word tool, but an item. And I think even in the state of UP, I heard it was declared by a prominent party that there would be free power for a few years for the farmers or something like that. Now, that situation is not very helpful. I think this is a commodity which is made commercially. It should be paid for. And secondly, I think we've got to ramp up our emphasis on energy efficiency, because we have to try and learn to use gadgetry and, in fact, I would say a differentiated duty structure on inefficient industrial products, so that you're able to balance and make sure that particularly the climate control commodities, refrigeration, air conditioning, all this, I think, needs to be handled intelligently with appropriate duty hikes on inefficient equipment, so that we try and reduce the power guzzling equipment. Industry, of course, would find it useful also to go in for efficiency, but that's a little long-term situation. You can't change your production lines overnight. Of this kind, I think of a coordinated approach, and at the same time coordination between the railways, Coal India and the generating companies to ensure optimum movement of the traffic, because passenger traffic has also increased now post loosening up of the COVID restrictions. It is going to be a tough call for all of us, but I think we've got to, every sector has to coordinate and make sure that we pass through this summer peacefully.
Right. Sabyasachi, if I could just, get you in here, because, clearly we can't not mention power tariffs. In Mumbai, for instance, reports are suggesting that there are price hikes by Tata as well as Adani to offset the price pressures. In fact, IEX tariff rates went up to about 20 rupees per unit. Where exactly do you see tariffs stabilizing?
So, the most important thing we must remember is that already the DISCOMs are operating at a revenue deficit. And we don't have numbers for, detailed numbers for 21 and 22. But my sense is that the gap between what they earn by way of revenue and what their actual costs are, the gap will not be less than 60-70 paisa. So there is one, even for the system as a whole, there is a gap that has to be made up. And then this short-term, cost hikes, which have taken place, they also have to be compensated for. So, but of course, it depends from, individual DISCOMs to DISCOMs. For example, if you are talking about Delhi DISCOMs or Mumbai DISCOMs, which are, relatively more profitable or less loss-making, there the gaps will not be very less. But, these are also the DISCOMs which are supplying power 24/7, and they will have to pick up a lot of expensive power. So obviously that has to be passed through, and it has to be passed through in a very timely manner. So definitely there will be short-term tariff hikes for certain pockets which are already supplying power 24/7. But more fundamentally for the broader DISCOMs pan-India, there is an existing gap which has to be made up, plus the short-term, phenomena. And let's not forget that in the longer term also there are a couple of other, cost shocks which are going to come. One is that, Coal India Limited has not really taken a major, price hike for the last 4 years since 2018. So there are, major, price, exercise might happen in the near future. And secondly, many of these thermal power plants will have to go in for, things like FGD and others to comply with the environmental norms. And over a period of time, that could add another about 25 to 30 paise for meeting all the FGD norms, SOX, NOx and other norms which have to be met. So there are a couple of, cost shocks even apart from these short-term kind of, price, this cost push which will have to be factored in by the domestic power system.
Sure. Okay. Mr. Razdan, Sabyasachi, both of you, thank you so much for taking the time out and speaking with us today and sharing with us your perspective.
Thank you. Good day to you.
Thank you.
Okay, on that note, we're going to take a very quick break with news that we're holding out okay. It was a quiet start. It continues to be a quiet day, although we're beginning to inch up a little bit more in the green. In fact, 17,500 is holding strong as we speak right now. We'll take a very quick break. When we come back, Chartbusters this afternoon, or rather morning.